The day the sky split open began like any other day in the small town of Willowford. Children ran through streets where the cobblestones were cracked but still familiar. Old men leaned on benches, trading stories they had told 1,000 times before. Mothers called their families in for supper, and fathers walked home with the weight of the day's work on their shoulders. Life was quiet. Life was ordinary, and in that ordinariness lay a comfort that no one thought could ever be broken. But then the world changed. It began with a sound. At first it was subtle, so faint that many mistook it for the rumble of a coming storm. Dogs pricked their ears, birds fell silent, and people turned their faces upward, shading their eyes against the fading sun. The sound grew deep and resonant, not thunder but something colder, something alien. Then the sky tore. A seam of silver light split the clouds in two, as though the heavens themselves had been cut by an invisible blade. From that wound emerged vast shapes shimmering like steel yet moving like living creatures. They blotted out the stars, enormous and unyielding, each vessel a cathedral of shadow and light. They descended without fire, without warning, and without words. At first some believed it was salvation. "They've come to help us," whispered a child, clutching her father's hand. "Maybe they'll heal the earth." For Earth was not what it once had been. Forests shrunk, oceans sickened, cities crumbling from their own weight. Hope was fragile, and in their innocence many thought the visitors brought answers. But hope burned quickly into fear. The ships opened, and from them stepped the hunters. They were tall, taller than any human, with limbs that glistened like metal but moved with dreadful grace. Their eyes glowed with a cold light, not fire but something emptier, hungrier. They carried no guns, no blades. Their weapons were themselves. The silence was the first strike. It pressed into the bones of every man, woman, and child, a crushing weight that smothered breath and froze thought. People dropped to their knees, clutching their skulls, unable to scream. And then the hunters began to take. Children were lifted into the air by invisible force, their cries cut short as they vanished into the ships. The old were seized without ceremony, their frailty dismissed as unworthy of resistance. The strong were hunted like animals, chased, bound, dragged away. Cities fell not in battles but in collapses. Entire towers crumbled as though a hand had swept across a board. Governments sent armies, but bullets melted in midair. Missiles fell useless and tanks froze in place. The hunters moved with inevitability like storms. They did not negotiate, did not demand, did not speak. To them, humanity was not a people. It was prey. For weeks the world burned. Nations vanished. Maps became meaningless. Roads turned into rivers of refugees. Families scattered into forests, deserts, and mountains, clinging to the earth as if it might still protect them. But in that chaos, something small but unyielding began to take root. In the broken town of Willowford, amidst ashes and echoes, a young man named Elias watched the ships darken the horizon. He had seen his father dragged into the sky. He had seen his home reduced to rubble. And yet, standing among the ruins, his heart did not collapse. Instead, it whispered something dangerous, something defiant. "We are not done. For every human who fled, another hid. For every family broken, another bound itself tighter." The hunters could silence voices, but they could not silence memory. They could shatter walls, but they could not shatter spirit. Somewhere in the mountains, in the deserts, in the forgotten corners of the earth, people gathered around small fires and whispered truths the invaders could not touch. "We endure, we endure, we endure." The sky had burned. The world had fallen. Humanity was hunted, but the flame of resistance, though small, had been lit, and once lit, it would not be extinguished. The night was cold in Willowford's ruins. The once bustling town, where laughter had filled markets and bells had marked the hour, was now nothing but broken stone and the whisper of wind. Fires had eaten whole streets, leaving only the skeletons of homes. Smoke lingered even weeks later, drifting like ghosts across the moonlit ground. In the hollow of a collapsed church, a circle of survivors huddled around a small, flickering flame. There were barely 24 of them. Men, women, and children who had lost everything except the will to stay alive. Their fire gave no warmth against the vast cold of despair, But it gave something else, something precious: togetherness. Elias sat among them, his dark eyes fixed on the fire as if its fragile light might show him a path forward. The memory of his father's capture burned behind his eyes, yet he had not broken. His hands were steady, his voice calm. That steadiness drew others toward him like moths clinging to a single candle in endless night. When he finally spoke, every face lifted toward him. "They think we are prey," Elias said. His tone was not loud, but it carried across the circle with weight. "But prey can bite back." A murmur stirred among the survivors, half hope, half disbelief. How could humans fight shadows that moved faster than thought? How could they resist beings who silenced guns with a wave of their hand? Then Mara spoke. She was a woman in her late 20s, with lines of exhaustion carved across her cheeks and grief heavy in her gaze. She had once been a school teacher, teaching children to count, to read, to dream. But when the hunters came, her little brother had been taken from her arms in a storm of light. Since then she had spoken little, her sorrow a wall between her and the world. Now she looked up at Elias, her voice trembling but clear. "If they hunt us, then we hunt them. Not with their weapons, with ours." Elias turned toward her. "And what are our weapons, Mara?" "Hope," she said, her hands curling into fists. "Memory." "Each other." The words hung in the air, simple yet sharp as steel. For a moment silence pressed down on them. Then one by one the others began to nod. An old man whose legs could no longer carry him far added, "I have stories of battles long past. If you will listen, I will share them." A young woman, no more than 16, whispered, "I can move quietly. I can bring food or messages." A mother drew her child closer. "I have nothing left but this boy. If you will fight, I will teach him courage." And so the circle grew stronger, not in numbers but in spirit. Elias felt something stir inside him, something fierce and unyielding. He stood, his shadow stretching across the cracked walls of the church. "They believe the world belongs to them, but this earth is ours. Our fathers tilled its soil. Our mothers sang to its skies. We will not hand it over. If they wish to call us prey, let them choke on the taste of their mistake." The firelight flickered against faces streaked with tears, faces hollow with hunger. But now those same faces carried a spark, small yes, but unmistakable. That night they made a pact. No matter how hopeless, no matter how small, they would resist. They would strike when they could, hide when they must, endure always. And though each carried wounds that no words could heal, they bound those wounds together until they became something stronger. When the fire finally burned down to embers, no one felt the cold quite as sharply. No one felt quite as alone. They were not soldiers. They were not kings or generals. They were farmers, teachers, children, mothers, broken men, and grieving women. But they were also something greater than all of that. They were human. And from that night forward, humanity would whisper its defiance into every shadow. The hunters would come again. They would tear down walls, shatter bodies, silence cries. But they would never silence the circle that had begun in Willowford, because the circle was not just a group of survivors. It was the beginning of a movement, one that carried a message far louder than fear. We endure. Night on Earth had changed. Before the hunters came, night was a time of rest, a place where families gathered close and dreams were spun beneath starlight. But now night was a veil of fear. The hunters roamed most freely when shadows stretched across the land. Their tall figures glided through ruins and forests without sound, their glowing eyes slicing through darkness like knives. Yet even in that terror, humans found a way to breathe, to move, to strike. Elias learned quickly that silence was humanity's greatest ally. Guns could no longer protect them. Bullets bent in the air, missiles crumbled before reaching their targets. But silence was beyond the hunters' grasp, and so silence became their weapon. The survivors in Willowford spread into the forests that surrounded their broken town. They traveled only at night, blending with shadows, leaving no tracks where the hunters might find them. It was in these nights that Elias and Mara began their first raids. They moved like whispers, quick, unseen, and gone before the hunters could sense them. From abandoned supply lines, they stole food meant for invaders. From pens where prisoners were kept, they freed captives. And always they left behind a mark carved into walls, trees, or stones. We endure. At first, it was nothing more than a word. But words have power. When a family hiding in the mountains stumbled upon that carved phrase, they wept, realizing they were not alone. When refugees in a burned-out city found the same words scratched into a wall, they gathered their courage and survived another day. And when a child too young to speak traced those letters with trembling fingers, the mother who had nearly given up her life chose instead to live for her son. The message spread farther than Elias ever dreamed. Across valleys, forests, and deserts, the words began to appear. No hunter could erase them quickly enough. Wherever they vanished, they returned again, etched deeper, bolder. The hunters soon gave the humans a name: the Hidden. It was meant as scorn, as mockery, a reminder that humanity had been reduced to rats scurrying in the shadows. But humans took the name for themselves and wore it with pride. They were hidden, yes, but they were watching. They were waiting. They were surviving. Mara, though scarred by grief, became one of the fiercest leaders of these hidden bands. She taught children how to walk without sound, how to blend their breath into the night, how to listen for the faint hum of hunters before they drew too near. Her voice, once fragile, became a steel thread weaving through their fragile lives. There is strength in being unseen, she told them. They cannot fight what they cannot catch. And when the time comes, when we rise, they will realize we were never weak. We were patient. The hunters grew restless. For all their power, their prey refused to be caught. Their silence frustrated them. Their unity baffled them. And though they towered above humanity with impossible weapons, they began to sense something dangerous: fear. Because for all their cruelty, the hunters could not erase what made humans unyielding: their stories. Around hidden fires, survivors whispered to one another. Stories of Willowford's circle. Stories of Elias and Mara's daring rescues. Stories of families reunited in the shadows. They were not merely tales. They were seeds of defiance. Each whispered word carried the strength of 100 unspoken ones. One boy, no more than 10, asked Elias one night, "Why do we fight?" "They are too big, too strong." "Why not hide forever?" Elias placed a hand on the boy's shoulder, his gaze fixed on the stars overhead. The same stars his father had once pointed out to him. "Because hiding is not living," Elias said softly. "One day we must rise. Until then, we whisper, we endure. But never forget, child, we are not running from them. We are preparing," and so humanity endured. In silence, in whispers, in the spaces between night and day, the hunters thought themselves unchallenged rulers of Earth. Yet they could not see what truly grew beneath their feet. Not prey, not broken, but the slow, steady heartbeat of a people waiting for the right moment to strike. And in that heartbeat, in those whispers in the dark, the seeds of freedom had already been sown. Winter had arrived, though no human heart could feel its cold as sharply as the weight of loss. Willowford's ruins, once a place of whispered resistance, now bore the scars of relentless attacks. Smoke still curled from smoldering walls, and the wind carried the acrid scent of burned wood and iron. Each night, survivors huddled together not just for warmth, but to remind one another they were alive. Elias had grown quieter in these days. His eyes, once sharp with defiance, now carried shadows deeper than any winter night. He moved among the hidden groups with measured steps, always alert, always calculating. Every lost family, every child taken by the hunters left him heavier with grief, but also sharper with resolve. Mara had been his constant companion since that first circle in the ruined church. Together they had saved dozens of lives, navigated forests without leaving a trace, and planned raids that slowly chipped away at the invaders' sense of dominance. But even she was not immune to the weight of sorrow. Her smile had all but disappeared, and her laughter was a ghost of what it had once been. That night, the hunters came with a fury unmatched before. They descended in silver columns, casting long, unbroken shadows across the ruins. Fire erupted along the streets as families scattered. Children screamed and smoke choked the air. The survivors ran as they had learned to do, but the hunters were faster, stronger, and relentless. Elias and Mara fought with everything they had, pulling children from the paths of hovering machines and hiding families beneath fallen stones. But in the chaos, Mara was struck. A beam of alien light struck her as she shielded a young child, throwing her to the ground with a force that twisted the air and rattled bones. Elias's heart froze. He sprinted to her side, dragging her into a shattered alley as hunters swept past. Her breaths were shallow, labored, but her eyes met his with the same fierce determination that had always burned there. "Do not stop," she whispered, her voice trembling but unyielding. "Even if I fall, promise me, Elias, you will carry the fire." Her hand, warm for only a fleeting moment, slipped from his grasp. Elias clutched it, unwilling to let go, unwilling to accept the truth he already knew. But Mara's body was too broken, her strength fading like the last ember of a dying fire. The hunters had taken so much from humanity, yet in that moment, they had also failed to understand something elemental. The human heart never truly breaks. Not entirely. Not when it carries the weight of hope. Elias rose, his chest burning with grief and fury. Around him, survivors who had hidden in the shadows emerged, eyes wide with fear, trembling but inspired by his courage. The hunters had thought they could crush humanity with fire and steel. They had thought that grief would render humans powerless. They were wrong. He lifted his voice above the roar of collapsing buildings and crackling fire. "We are not finished. Not by your machines, not by your fire, not by your darkness. We endure." The words were more than defiance. They were a spark thrown into dry tinder. Survivors grabbed whatever they could: stones, broken wood, makeshift weapons. Children flung rocks from rooftops. Elders screamed truths that carried through the night. For the first time, the hunters hesitated. They had never seen humans fight like this. Not in groups of the weak, not in fury born from love and loss. Elias carried Mara to the edge of the forest, laying her gently against the roots of a massive tree. He pressed his hands to her face, his lips trembling as he whispered, "You will not be forgotten. I will carry the fire, Mara, I promise." The hunters swept past, their attention drawn elsewhere, unaware that humanity had learned the first rule of survival. Grief, when tempered with courage, could become a weapon far deadlier than any machine. That night, among the cold and the ashes, the survivors gathered again. They buried Mara beneath the roots of the ancient tree, a symbol not of death but of endurance. Her sacrifice became a rallying cry, a lesson etched into every human heart that whispered, "Freedom is never free, and courage always demands a price." From that night on, every raid, every escape, every hidden act of resistance carried her memory. Humanity would bleed, but it would not bow. Humanity would cry, but it would rise. And the hunters, no matter how tall, how powerful, or how silent, would eventually learn that humans did not yield, not even to sorrow. Because the fire Mara carried and Elias promised to bear was something alien invaders could never understand. It was hope, it was memory, it was human, and it could not be destroyed. The invaders believed that power alone could bend the world to their will. Machines that tore through concrete like paper, limbs taller than trees, weapons that could silence mountains. These were the tools they brought. To them, humanity was weak, fragile, and fleeting. Yet for every towering machine, there was a human mind that had learned to adapt, to endure, to survive. It began quietly, in the mountains and forests, where survivors had hidden and regrouped. Villages burned, but the humans who survived were already thinking, already planning. Where the hunters expected chaos, humans created order. Where they expected fear, humans built courage. Elias and the hidden had become legends among the scattered survivors. His name, whispered in shadowed camps, carried hope, and Mara's sacrifice was more than memory. It was fuel. Humans began turning the very world against the invaders. Forests became mazes of traps, roots and vines twisted to ensnare machines, pits dug to swallow legs and claws alike. Rocks rolled down hillsides with precise timing, crushing armor or scattering troops. Fires were no longer tools of desperation but weapons of strategy, sweeping through paths the invaders assumed safe. One night, Elias stood atop a ridge overlooking the Gorge of Dawn. Below him, A hunter patrol moved confidently, unaware of the trap being laid. He looked to the group behind him, farmers, teachers, children, elders, none trained in war yet all resolute. "Remember," Elias said quietly, "we are not machines. We are human. And humans think. Humans endure. Tonight, the hunters will learn that even steel can fall to stone." The gorge had been chosen carefully. Narrow cliffs, jagged rocks, hidden ledges. Every move the invaders made had been anticipated. The humans waited, hearts pounding, breaths shallow. They were small, weak, but they were cunning. When the patrol entered the trap, it was subtle at first. Stones rolled down the slopes, striking the towering figures. Then vines and ropes tied with ingenuity born of desperation ensnared their limbs. Fires erupted in the underbrush, forcing the hunters to retreat, stumble, and panic. The humans struck from hidden positions, hurling sharpened spears and rocks with precision and speed. For the first time, the hunters faltered. Their machines toppled, their steps faltered, and fear, a sensation they had never known in their conquests, touched them. Below the cliffs, a child watched her first kill. Her eyes widened, but she did not flinch. Elias's words came back to her. "We are human, we endure." She understood that this night, she was part of something larger, something eternal. The Battle of the Gorge of Dawn became a turning point. Stories of that night spread across hidden communities like wildfire. Humans who had hidden in basements and forests whispered to one another. Victory was possible. The hunters were not gods. They were not invincible. They were merely beings who had underestimated the human spirit. Even the youngest survivors began contributing. Children carried messages from one hiding place to another, passing intelligence that saved dozens of lives. Elders shared memories of tactics and strategies long forgotten, turning history into a weapon. Farmers with calloused hands became architects of traps and ambushes. Everyone in every role became indispensable. Elias watched as the survivors celebrated quietly among the rocks and trees. No one danced. No one laughed outright. They had learned that joy could be stolen quickly, but there was pride in their endurance, and hope in their gaze. The hunters would return surely. Their fleets would descend again. Their machines would crush towns. Their strength would terrify, and their silence would weigh heavily on human hearts. But tonight humanity had shown that even in the darkest hours, when the world seemed poised to break them, they could rise. The world was changing. Not because the invaders ruled it, but because humans had learned to fight back, not with superior technology, but with superior spirit. Stone could strike steel. Fire could disrupt machines. Human courage could unseat giants. And in the quiet moments after the battle, when the wind swept across the gorge and the survivors caught their breath, Elias knew something extraordinary. The hunters had underestimated humans in every way that mattered. They had assumed fear would dominate, that grief would paralyze. They had not counted on ingenuity, on memory, on unity. They had not counted on the unyielding, relentless, astonishing force of the human heart. The war was far from over. But humanity had learned a crucial truth. The hunters could break cities, but they could never break a people determined to endure, and the hidden were determined. Elias stood on the ridge of a scorched plateau, watching the invaders move across the horizon. The hunters had grown restless since the Gorge of Dawn. Their confidence had wavered for the first time, and though they still towered with impossible machines, a subtle unease had begun to show in their movements. It was Mara's memory that guided him now. Though she was gone, her sacrifice had ignited a spark in humanity that no hunter, no machine could extinguish. Elias had become more than a survivor. He was a leader, a beacon for the hidden, a strategist born of grief and fire. For weeks humans had studied the hunters, learning their habits, weaknesses, and rhythms. Every patrol had been mapped, every fortress catalogued, every machine observed. What humanity discovered shook even the hidden to their core. The hunters were not invincible. They bled, they felt fear, and most importantly, they had one weakness no human could destroy directly. They feared loss. It was a revelation born of desperation. A captured patrol unit, ensnared in the mountains, had been left alive for interrogation. Elias approached cautiously, knowing that even a single misstep could cost him his life. The invader's prisoner did not resist. Instead, it trembled, its glowing eyes narrowing as though it understood something far greater than technology or conquest. "You fear," Elias whispered, testing his insight. The creature froze, then lowered its head. In that instant, Elias saw what no human had yet glimpsed: vulnerability. The hunters had come not merely to dominate. They had come because their own world was dying. Earth had been misperceived as conquest rather than sanctuary. They were refugees who had mistaken prey for surrender. Elias turned to his people, spreading the truth. "They are not gods," he said. "They are desperate. They thought we were cattle, but they will learn that we are not prey. We are human. And humans do not bow." A plan began to form. The hidden would no longer simply hide or raid. They would fight with understanding. They would exploit fear as humans always had, with strategy, cunning, and courage. Caves became fortresses. Forests became mazes. Mountains became traps. And across these landscapes, humans moved as shadows, invisible but everywhere. Every intercepted patrol, every liberated prisoner, every hidden cache of supplies built a network the invaders could not anticipate. It was during one moonless night that the first coordinated strike was launched. Dozens of human groups converged on a major supply hub. Fires erupted, machines toppled, and the hunters' formations, once unbreakable, splintered under the pressure. Every move was calculated, every attack synchronized. The invaders could not comprehend the humans' unity. They had seen isolated resistance, scattered rebellions, but never a coordinated force that moved like thought itself. It was as if the earth itself had risen to defend its children. In the aftermath, Elias surveyed the field. Smoke and debris mingled with the first hints of dawn. Human bodies, weary but unbowed, moved among the remnants of machines once thought invincible. The hidden had proven their point. Fear could be turned back on those who wielded it. More than strategy, the victory revealed something deeper. Humans were not just survivors, they were teachers of courage. Every child who delivered a message across a dangerous plain, every elder who guided a trap, every farmer who risked his life to fight back, all had learned the truth that no machine, no alien, no army could erase. Humanity thrives where unity, intellect, and heart intersect. And as dawn broke, Elias saw the subtle but undeniable change in the hunters. Their glowing eyes flickered with uncertainty. Their steps faltered. They were powerful, yes, but now they knew they could be challenged. Now they understood that this world would not submit, that humanity would never bow quietly. Elias raised his voice to his people, standing among the smoking ruins of the first major victory. "Today we have shown them who we are. Not monsters, not prey, not weak, not broken. We are human. And humanity endures." The hidden erupted into quiet cheers, cautious yet uncontainable. This was no final victory, but it was a turning point. The tide had begun to shift slowly but irreversibly toward humanity. The hunters would return. Their numbers, their machines, and their might were still formidable. But now, Elias and the hidden knew a truth that could not be erased. Fear was theirs, but courage belonged to humans. And courage, when shared, becomes unstoppable. The war was far from over, yet for the first time, humanity could stand without trembling. For the first time, the hunters would kneel, not in victory, but eventually, in surrender, and humanity would be ready. The world had changed. Cities lay in ruins, forests bore scars of fire and steel, and the oceans whispered with the echoes of lost lives. Yet among the destruction, a new pulse had emerged, a heartbeat of defiance that no hunter could extinguish. Humanity had endured, humanity had fought, and humanity would triumph. Elias stood atop a shattered tower, gazing across a battlefield that stretched for miles. Machines that once seemed invincible now lay broken and smoking, their metal twisted in ways nature never intended. The hunters, once towering and untouchable, now knelt, exhausted and wary. Their glowing eyes flickered with fear and disbelief, for they had learned the hard truth. Humans were not prey. Around him, the hidden moved among the remnants of battle, weary but unbowed. Children carried messages to scattered survivors. Elders tended the wounded, and young warriors checked traps and fortifications. Every action, every gesture, was a testament to resilience, to courage, to the unbreakable human spirit. Elias felt the weight of all they had lost. Mara, and countless others who had given their lives so that humanity might live. Yet he also felt the power of all they had gained: unity, strength, knowledge, and the fire of determination that had burned brighter than any hunter's might. He raised his voice, not as a commander but as a witness to human endurance. "We were hunted," he said. "We were tested. We were broken but not defeated. Today we have shown the universe who we are. Humanity bends to no chains. Humanity kneels to no master. We are more than flesh and blood. We are hope. We are courage. We are relentless." The Invaders' leader, a being taller than any tree and clad in reflective steel, lifted its head from the ground. Its glowing eyes met Elias's, wide with recognition. It had underestimated the simplest truth: humans could endure loss, fear, and death, yet rise again stronger than before. The hunters had conquered worlds before, but never had they faced prey that thought, felt, and remembered. Their victories had always been hollow, for they had never encountered determination like this. One by one, the hunters lowered themselves further, until they knelt fully among the broken earth, machines silent, weapons abandoned. They understood at last that Earth was not theirs to take, that its people could not be cowed by fear, that the fire of humanity would never be snuffed. Elias walked among them, stepping carefully over twisted metal and scorched soil. He saw faces that were alien yet terrified, realizing that even beings of power could feel the weight of justice when confronted by unity and courage. A child tugged at his sleeve, holding a small, smoothed stone. "Will they come back?" the child asked. Elias knelt, placing his hands on the child's shoulders. "Perhaps," he said softly. "But now we know that even if they do, they will find us ready. They will find a people who do not yield. They will find a fire that cannot die." Across the battlefield, survivors began to gather, forming circles like those from the earliest days of Willowford. They did not cheer in triumph alone. They wept, they embraced, they remembered the fallen. But in those tears and hugs burned an eternal truth. Humanity survives not because of weapons, not because of machines, but because of heart, courage, and unity. The sun rose over the horizon, casting golden light across ashen steel. Shadows receded as warmth touched the earth once more. For the first time in decades, the sky was quiet and unbroken. Yet it no longer belonged to the hunters. It belonged to humans. Elias lifted his gaze toward the heavens. Somewhere Mara's spirit might have smiled. Somewhere every fallen human bore witness. And somewhere the universe had learned a lesson written not in fire or steel, but in resilience. Do not underestimate humanity. From the ashes of fear, the hidden stood tall. They had been hunted, tested, and tried. They had been broken and scarred. Yet in every scar, every tear, and every heartbeat, they carried something no invader could ever destroy: the soul of humankind. And as the hunters knelt, Elias whispered to the wind, to the child, to every survivor across the world, "We endure. We remember. We rise always." The war was over, not with a single blow, but with 1,000 acts of courage. Humanity had shown the universe that it could not be conquered. It could not be silenced. It could not be bowed. And on that day the invaders learned what the hidden had known all along. A human spirit, once awakened, cannot kneel. The world had burned, but humanity had risen, and humanity would never fall again.